Hello everyone, my name's Quinn and welcome to Q's Book Reviews. Today I'm just going to be talking about a few of my favorite books and authors to hopefully help you guys find some new things to check out. Now, I actually haven't been reading for all that long, and despite being a pretty slow reader, I've managed to finish some amazing books. Most of these are pretty well known, but a few of them I feel like are kind of underappreciated. And if you like any of the books on this list and you haven't heard of some of them, you're probably going to like those too, so I highly recommend you check them out. Now, before I get into the list proper, I just have a few honorable mentions. This is mostly just authors that I've read a few books from, but I haven't found anything that truly stands out yet, so I just want to keep reading more of them, and I'm sure I'll find something that I love. First is Haruki Murakami. Here I have Kafka on the Shore. I've only read a few of his books so far, but there's just something about the vibe he's able to create. And there's always a few scenes in his books that have really just stayed with me in my mind. I'm very excited to read the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle next. Then we have Dostoevsky. I don't think he necessarily needs an introduction. I might end up doing a whole video on him at some point. But so far I've read Crime and Punishment, Notes from Underground, as well as The Brothers Karamazov. None of these have been like all that great, but they're pretty enjoyable to read. I don't know, there's something about Dostoevsky that I definitely appreciate, but I think maybe I'll find it in its peak in one of his other books, so I'm excited to check them out as well. Okay, now on to the actual list. Whenever someone asks me for a classic to start with, chances are I'll recommend The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Despite being over 100 years old, it's still really easy to read, and it actually is really enjoyable as well. The book centers around a young man who gets his portrait painted, and then it descends into sort of a feverish nightmare as he realizes that the portrait is aging for him and he's staying forever beautiful. There's some really, really amazing lines in this book, and the entire atmosphere is just immaculate. Highly recommend. Next up is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I don't actually have the physical version of this with me right now, but so far this is one of my other favorite classics in my long journey to read as many as I can. Again, this is really surprisingly easy to read for kind of an old classic, and the book centers around the ill-fated love between Heathcliff and Catherine. It's full of gothic gloominess, and the narrative unfolds in actually a really unique way. And ever since I've read it, I've been wanting to reread it, which I think is always a good sign. So another great one. Then we have The Stranger by Albert Camus. For a long while, this was probably my favorite book. And now I think it's actually been surpassed by another one on this list. It's by the French-Algerian philosopher Albert Camus. And it follows the story of a man who, after his mother dies, he's faced with the absurdity of life. It's equal parts enlightening and horrific, and I really haven't read another book like it. Given how short it is, I don't think there's really any excuse not to read it, so go ahead. Next, we have another author that I don't actually have any of their books on hand with me, but that's Kafka. I have a lot of appreciation for Kafka in general, and while I've read both The Trial and The Castle, I think the Metamorphosis is really something special. It's a short story for which almost everybody knows the plot, but I think it's really worth reading beyond just the opening where the main character wakes up in his bed transformed into a bug, and the first thing that he worries about is how he's going to get to work. It deals with family and purpose in capitalist society perfectly, and again, it's so short, really I think everyone should read it. I'm also very excited to read more by Kafka, especially in the Penal Colony. Now on to Moby Dick by Herman Melville. You can tell how beat up my nice copy of this book is, just how long it took me to read this book, but I think it's really worth it. It's essentially a retelling of Shakespeare's King Lear, describing Ahab's deranged obsession with the white whale. It's kind of a controversial one, I feel. It's probably not a book for everybody, even though it has, sort of long held its place in the Western literary canon. But I do think that everybody can find something beautiful in it. The scope of this novel is really, really amazing. It's probably one of the first sort of encyclopedic novels that was written, and it's pretty amazing for that. Melville will go from intricately describing, how ropes are laid out on a whaleboat to, some super deep philosophical passage. And those are always my favorite parts of the book. You kind of have to be along for the ride on this one, but if you like the sea as much as I do, I think you'll really like this book. Here I have Labyrinths by the Argentinian author Jorge Luis Borges. Often I've heard him described as the bridge between modernism and postmodernism. These stories deal with a lot of the themes that I'm most interested in, such as, constructions of meaning and order. Often Joyce and Pynchon are considered to be really, really hard authors to read. And while I haven't read any Joyce to compare this to, I found Borges, just as difficult as Pynchon. And that's because he often loads his stories with a lot of references, literary, religious, mystical, that it took me a really long time to finish a lot of these, even though they're so short. That's not to say you're not going to enjoy the stories without understanding all the references. I certainly didn't understand them all. But I highly encourage you to take the plunge and get lost in the labyrinths that he's able to create. A few of the standout short stories for me are Talon Ukbar Orbis Tertius, The Library of Babel, and Death in the Compass. All of the stories are really great, but those in particular I really enjoyed. Here we have White Noise, my first, but certainly not last Don DeLillo book. White Noise left me absolutely stunned. I wanted to reread it the minute I finished it, and I've been thinking about it ever since. It's quite hard to describe what this book is about, but it centers around the lives of a family in a fictional American town, though the town really feels like it could be just about anywhere in America. The airborne toxic event, occurring when a train carrying strange toxic chemicals derails and explodes, resembles the disaster that occurred in East Palestine just a few months ago to such an uncanny degree. I think it really just furthers the importance that I feel this book has. A movie for this actually just came out, but I have to say, it looks so awful, I can't bring myself to watch it, especially since I love this book so much. I'm honestly not even sure how you could, write a movie for a book like this, but if you've read the book and you've seen the movie, I'd love to know what you thought about it, so let me know. One more thing I want to mention about this book, I got it actually used, and I always love when there's annotations from previous people in it, and this one had some really great ones. Not necessarily what they wrote, but they just had weird drawings across all of the pages that always made me smile. Finally, we have The Crying of Lot 49. I don't even know where to start with this one other than to say it's an incredible novel. This is essentially a short story by the infamous reclusive author Thomas Pynchon. After the main character, Oedipus' friend, dies, Oedipus is launched on an unforgettable, paranoia-filled journey to uncover a secret postal service conspiracy lying at the heart of America and perhaps all of society. The ending to this book is just absolute perfection. So many scenes from this are just seared into my memory. I think it's safe to say that this is currently my favorite book. Although it's one of the more widely known Pynchon novels and is often suggested as an introduction to his work, it's honestly just as convoluted as some of his more difficult works, such as Gravity's Rainbow, which I'm reading through and almost finished with right now. The amount of references and detail that he was able to cram into this pretty short book, it's only 138 pages, is truly mind-blowing and gives me even more respect for it. I think about this book constantly, and there's just so much that can be pulled from its pages that it really invites countless rereads. If you haven't read this yet, I highly, highly recommend you pick it up. And there it is. That's a short list of some books that I really, really love. Honestly, I've just been so inspired to read more by these. So again, if any of these are new to you, please do give them a chance. I have a few more ideas for videos that I'm very excited to make. So if you'd be kind enough, please subscribe and I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you have any recommendations for me, I'd love to see them in the comments.